So our first panel today, I'm really excited to have a chance to introduce our panelists and our moderator, all close friends of OTT.X. We're going to start off by talking about the role of Avails in the digital supply chain. Avails are a super important communication tool. As we all know, it's the way that we communicate what our contracts have been conveying to our supply chain and throughout our organizations. So we've been talking about them for a long time. Craig Seidel has reminded me that we'll probably always be talking about them. So with that, I wanted to introduce our panelists and moderator, Craig Seidel from MovieLabs. He's the Senior Vice President of Technology. Jacob Weinstein, he was VP of Operations at Sony New Media Solutions. Armand DiCarlo, Technical Onboarding Manager at Sony New Media Solutions. I want to let everybody know that we will be taking questions. If you have questions during the panel, please use the Q&A button in your Zoom console. You can type them up as you go, and we'll have a chance partway through to take a break and address some of your questions. Also, if you want, we're happy to have you read them aloud. I can bring you on through the power of Zoom, and I can pass you the virtual mic, and you can ask Craig and our panelists yourself. So with that, I'll welcome Craig, Armand, and Jacob. Gentlemen.
Hi there. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. Armand and Jacob, you want to unmute and turn on your video? Thank you. Pleasure to be here. To Mark's point, given we're in a global pandemic, I guess it's a pleasure to be anywhere. But it's a particular pleasure to be talking with you two about Avails. You are in the crossroads of between platforms and studios and broadcasters and distributors and so forth. So you kind of see it all. So you have a unique perspective on this. So it's a pleasure having you on this panel.
Thanks.
Some people are new to this, so I thought maybe we could start, and you could talk about what we mean when we use the term avail. What are we talking about?
Yeah. Well, like you said, the avail hits a lot of pieces of the supply chain. So I think if we had all day, we could talk about the different things that avail means to different people. But at its core, the avail, typically today we think of a spreadsheet, but the means of communicating the data is secondary. What's being communicated is a description of the content that's available from a licensor to a licensee. So typically this communication is going from, say, a studio to for example, a retailer who's got the ability to distribute that content to consumers. Mm-hmm. And the information being conveyed in an avail, a single item of an avail, says basically this piece of content in this region at this time. There's a windowing component to the avail, which adds a layer of complexity. And other details that describe what the retailer is allowed to do with the content. Can they sell it for purchase to own? Can they rent it out? At what price? Mm-hmm. So all of those details for the retailer to know what to do, or whatever that licensee is doing with the content. The windowing component adds a layer of complexity to it because very often you're not talking about a single row on a spreadsheet or a single piece of information. You're talking about lots of different windows and lots of different rights and usages that go with even a single title. So for a studio, creating a document for a given retailer, it could be thousands and thousands of pieces of data that describe that studio's catalog and all of the rights that are being conveyed. It's kind of like, in simple terms, it's like a menu at a restaurant, right? Where the studio is the restaurant and the customer sitting at the table is a licensee.
Yeah, I like that menu at a restaurant analogy. You can pick what you want and ignore
Mm-hmm.
the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Or order the whole thing if you want it.
Yeah, exactly. One of the important things that I think is important to realize is the power from the avail. A lot of it comes from how early you can generate it. You don't actually need to have content in your possession yet in order to create an avail for that content.
Mm-hmm.
All you need is an intent to create that content. So a lot of it is very forward planning. So one of the reasons that the avail is so powerful for the supply chain and for all of the downstream participants in the supply chain is because it can give you a roadmap to follow.
It
Yeah,
defines strategy.
you just touched on something very important there, which is that the avail is distinct from the asset delivery. Can you maybe expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So avail is really just information. So if you know, you don't even really need to know what you're going to call a piece of content. All you need to create an avail, at least, you know, using the EMA spec for an avail, is a particular identifier for that piece of content that ideally isn't going to change over time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, all you need to say is, you know, I'm going to create this record in my system that says I'm going to have something in my catalog at a future point, give it an identifier, and then you can start creating avails with varying degrees of specificity over time. And you don't actually need to have any other material.
Okay, I just want to throw in that we talk about avails and title list, and use other terms for it. In some circles, people refer to the avail to mean something that is a offer, at which point the platform will choose what they want, and a title list to mean it's a mutual agreement about what content is being licensed. And what's interesting about the title list aspect of it is it's a mutual negotiation, which means it can go either direction. Usually avail goes from the content owner over to the to the platform.
Right.
So when we say avail, we're using the term very generally to mean any of these kinds of licensing mechanisms.
Yep.
So when we now have EMA avails, finally, and there's a standard for transmitting avails. But what is, not everyone's adopted it. So what is it replacing? In other words, if someone has something in their system, how are people doing it without the standard?
Well, just to kind of touch on that, I think historically from a supply chain perspective and third-party vendor, you know, we would get access letters or we would get POs or some element of communication, usually by email driven on a regular basis. And when avails came to light and were communication from the content owner to the platform, we saw an opportunity to add standardization to that practice overall. So a lot of content owners were already making avails because they were communicating this, but they were doing it their own custom way. EMA allowed us to kind of give us a certain kind of set standard that we could work off of. So being a supply chain entity in the middle of that, we kind of said, give us the avails. It helps set the strategy also for our understanding of what we're going to be doing with that content and launching it. So we worked from that perspective to kind of adopt them on a regular basis, leverage them going forward, get away from the historical elements of all this variability that exists and kind of give a uniform strategy to our approach. Yeah.
All right. So do you want to say something, Jacob?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that a lot of folks sort of blink a little bit when they come to us and they say, you know, we want you to deliver these 100 titles to this platform in these 30 languages. And as Armand says, when we say, well, give us the avails, some folks aren't expecting that question yet. And so I think that's something that hasn't caught on fully, but that's something that's important, is that the avail, because it contains all the information that the endpoint needs to know what they need to do with the content and what they're going to receive down the line, it would stand to reason that it also gives a post house enough information to know what they're going to receive from a studio in a relatively specific sense and what they need to do with it. So we can derive from the avail. It's a bit of work, but it's certainly less work to do it from this standard format, right? Than to have to take these legacy formats of PDFs and, you know, phone calls and emails. So, you know, one of the first challenges I had in my career as an ops manager was taking PDFs that were coming to me from external systems and, you know, script them into spreadsheet form so that our system could handle them in bulk, right? And, you know, it's nice to be able to say, okay, you don't need to take your nicely organized information, turn it into a PDF because a human being needs to read it and tell an operator what to do. Just give me the data in a format that I can just ingest into a system. So that's kind of what the Avail replaces if it's used in its most robust way.
Yeah, one of my earliest experiences with Avails was, so I said, so okay, how did they deliver it? And someone showed me a scanned Word document that was emailed. So it wasn't even enough to just convert the Word document to PDF. It had to be scanned. And I think like some lawyer like that, because it couldn't be modified.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I said, why don't they fax it?
Right.
Okay, so now we have a scanned Word document with all the Avail on it.
Yes.
What could possibly go wrong? In other words, what are the kind of problems that you'd see you encountered prior to having some at least semi-automated way of ingesting Avails?
Yeah, I think overall, from a supply chain perspective and what we've dealt with, its lack of information on a regular basis seems to be one of the major issues that we run into. So either it's malformation of the data and it's just incorrect or giving us the wrong information. We're being told to send one title when it's really a separate title that's been an agreement, or we need to understand if we're sending a dub or a sub element and we didn't have that information or it wasn't provided. We run into issues with data on a regular basis where we're kind of combing through it, and at that point we kind of have to, when we run into that issue, we have to triage and pivot. So it's either reaching out to the content owner, understanding the inventory, working on a regular basis with them to kind of build that relationship to make sure that their content goes live. We've also built practices of validation when dealing with Avails on a regular basis, where we import them in the system and we want to know up front what's wrong. We don't want to get five steps down the supply chain and find out where we have a wrong ID or a value. So we've been working with these issues on a regular basis, coming up with different solutions to kind of help drive, a supply chain that can provide that data up front. Yeah.
So like, imagine you're sitting at home and you're watching your favorite show on Netflix, and you're binging it. You get to the 5th episode. Well, let's forget Netflix. It could be any platform. And you get to episode 9 out of 10, and you start watching it, and 10 minutes in, you realize that it's actually the last episode of the season, right? And then you watch it, you go, well, where's the 9th episode? And you go to episode 10, and oh, that one's episode 9. These things happen, and at the back end of it, it's highly possible, and these things have happened, we've seen them, that there's just some ID or some value that got swapped on an Avail or got misinterpreted. It could be the Avail was right and there was some process downstream from the Avail that flip-flopped them. Yeah. And those are the kinds of dangers that you have when you have a sort of a combination of human and automated processes that inevitably something will, after 10,000 iterations, go wrong.
Yeah, also, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get a phone call any time of the night or day if something goes up early or late.
Yeah.
I know one studio who justified their entire investment in Avails based on the possibility that a single title could go up early or late.
Yep.
They'll put, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into marketing something to go live on a particular date, and then it doesn't, or it doesn't on some sort. If you're a platform and you miss the date, your customer is going to go to another platform.
Yeah. Right.
If it goes up at the
Yeah, it's tricky too, because we're here saying, the Avails should start the process ideally. We want to have actionable information in the Avail early on so that supply chain activity can begin. But right now, sometimes those Avails come in later in the game for a variety of reasons. And so if you're sitting back in the supply chain saying, I'm not going to start my packaging and delivery workflows or my post-production workflows until I have an actionable Avail, that can also cause issues where, like you said, maybe the Avail comes in late, and it's not that the Avail is incorrect, it's just that the other pieces of the puzzle didn't have enough time to react to it and get it up in time.
Yeah, our goal here is to make the supply chain boring, and bad Avails will definitely not be boring.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So, but I just want to pause here for a second, saying we have the Q&A window. It's sitting at the bottom of your screen somewhere. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop a question in there. If you want to put it just in text, that's fine. Or if you want to ask it verbally, just say so in the question, and Eric will turn on your mic. So Avails can't be the only, EMA Avails can't be the only possibility. So notwithstanding the scanned Word documents, what are some alternatives if people are want to do an evaluation of the different alternatives of doing Avails?
Yeah, Armand, did you want to go? Or?
Well, I was just going to highlight, Avails overall, we see them as a form of communication. So the idea of saying a spreadsheet, it's not just a spreadsheet. It's a way of communication. And when we deal with technology, there's multiple opportunities for that. So, whether it's an Excel sheet because, let's say we've had content owners come to us and they're smaller houses and they have issues, understanding where their content is. They have issues dealing with the elements of rights or licensing, and they need some quick way that they can get their content up because speed is the issue at the time. An Excel sheet is kind of the quickest and easiest answer for that, but we also see them coming in and also discussions about, whether it's XMLs or, we have certain partners of ours which are API driven, where, we integrate with their system. They're a fully robust entity. They have a ton of support. They've got development teams overall, and they're able to communicate to us. So, via an API configuration directly into our system. So, Avails overall, it's not just a single standard, it's a way of communication, and we can kind of drive that with our partners on a regular basis.
Yeah, by the way, for those who don't know, the Avails spec comes in two forms that are they're compatible, a XML form and a spreadsheet form, Excel form. And well, there's a lot of joking in the working groups that I'm a fan of XML, but both work, and probably most people have gone for the Excel just because it's a nice balance between human readable and something that can be both generated and ingested automatically. Yeah. There's also API specs to help with APIs if people are interested in such things. Mm-hmm. So let's switch a little bit. Let's talk about business models. So there's a lot of perception that Avails is just for transactional VOD, TVOD that's rented by, and that's it. Can you comment a little bit about using Avails in other business models and how it works?
Yeah, sure. I think, at its core, the information in the Avail is generalized. It's a way of conveying accessibility and scheduling. So any application that will require you to schedule content out and control who has access to it and what kind of things they can do with it will work with the Avails construct. So one good example of that is B2B sites that studios, content owners, licensors might create to sort of audition their catalogs for various potential licensees. We see this pretty often where, someone will have a catalog and they want to get it out there in the world, but so you can create your own sort of internal OTT-like platform and drive it all from data that looks like Avails. It doesn't necessarily need to be, purchase or rent. It can have, and it lends itself to the sort of token user library model where you can say, well, this particular offer, this particular user has the ability to access it. So you can tie all these pieces together based on the Avail, and that's one very useful use case for it that isn't really consumer facing. As a post house, we find that being able to ingest Avails and being able to output Avails is really, really handy. It's handy to be able to, as a feature in our platform, but it's also handy supply chain wise. We can communicate in the same language that a lot of other participants upstream and downstream from us are using. So I think as a tool within your business, there's a lot of ways to use it. It's a rich source of information. So I would imagine that if there's a data miner out there who happen to have access and legal ability to mine through large quantities of Avails, there's a lot of interesting information that one could glean from it.
Yeah, so yeah, speaking of large information, I mean, this was years ago, but there was one studio who had 800,000 Avails, and I'm sure it's grown from there.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if you take a whole bunch of television series and with lots of seasons and have them in different territories and all that, you know, different resolutions and all that kind of
Right.
stuff, you
Yeah.
can get a lot of information in there, and you know, it is a lot of information to
Yeah,
mine.
for business
So,
intelligence, it can be a powerful tool.
sort of on the flip side of that, you've got some studios that have multi-100,000 line, maybe multi-million line avails at some point, and you have ones that have 10 titles, right, total. And you know, if you're a platform, you're dealing with big and small partners, you know, as part of your offering. How does Avails differ between the, you know, 800,000 avail companies and the, you know, couple hundred avail companies?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest difference is the organizational fortitude and that it takes to come up with strategies that can stand the test of time. When you start trying to generate avails for your content, there's a lot of ducks you need to get in a row, so to speak. And for a large company, those strategy conversations can be quite tedious and take a long time because there's so many people that are consuming the avails within the organization across the globe potentially that are impacted by it. For a smaller studio, those conversations can be quicker and the impact of switching gears is not quite so severe. So, you know, I think that's probably the biggest difference with large companies versus small.
Yeah, working with smaller companies, we've seen them scale down the amount of avails and really the requirement of values for their avails because they won't be leveraging all the functionality or all the tools or doing the like tiered release approach to certain things. So, you know, they want their content, they want it out now at this point, and that's kind of what we've seen avails do on a regular basis for
Yeah.
them.
I think with large companies, you're also looking at a lot of technology, a lot of information systems that need to integrate with the Avail. And so at smaller companies, sometimes you have that, but usually it's much more consolidated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're a huge company, the investment to do, you know, generate a, you know, you probably, the plus side is you have the potentially the resources to develop a large complex system to do avails and tie it into all the other systems. The downside is that you have a lot of other systems. Like a typical studio will have like 20 distinct systems that don't talk to each other,
Right.
that are, you know, probably 5 of which are required to generate avails.
Exactly.
So it's not trivial to get there. And
Yeah.
now you can't say it because I told, you know, the rules here are no advertising, but I can say it, which is, you know, it's very helpful to go to service providers if you're a smaller entity or if your partners are smaller entities. That way the service provider can absorb a lot of the complexities, and they have a lot of experience working with smaller companies as well. So
Absolutely.
it's a strategy for the companies that say, what's an avail? And you have to get them from that point to standard, you know, delivery. So which leads me to my next question is, what does it look like when a company shows up and says, what's an avail? In other words, how do you get them acclimated into the avails world of standards?
Armand, that sounds like onboarding.
That is
So
onboarding.
yes, it is. So yeah, that falls within our world. So, you know, pretty much overall, you know, well, first off, you know, you want to speak to the content owner. You want to understand what content they're working with on a regular basis and the scale and scope that they're trying to accomplish with their content. From that perspective, you know, their technical capabilities. So, you know, we're kind of walking down the line of, you know, a smaller content owner on a regular basis. So, you know, with this approach, you know, it's an Excel spreadsheet. It's understanding, you know, what their content is, where they want it to go, at what format, in what way, and where they want to deliver it to, you know, approaching from a traditional approach of delivery here. So, you know, walking through the, you know, the Avail sheet, you know, as with the approach of OTT.X and EMA, you know, we want to add standardization across the industry because it makes everything easier for everyone. You know, if we can get a content owner on EMA, you know, it handshakes really well with MovieLabs. So, you know, it allows us to do our deliveries across, you know, multiple platforms. So, you know, really working with them and educating them, you know, kind of giving them the basic understanding of what to do with it and how to integrate with their system. You know, I don't want to say that every content owner is a snowflake scenario under themselves, but, you know, they do have ways of doing things. And on top of it, we're dealing with, you know, 100 years of legacy information from just working with film. You know, we've got, you know, old catalogs, old data, old formats, everything across the board, and, you know, kind of diving in with them and kind of explaining, you know, from a basic perspective, you know, what an Avail can do, and bringing them to like the new delivery models, you know, is kind of a great thing. So, you know, we take it on a case-by-case basis, and we drive it with them. We strive for EMA, and we integrate with our systems, and we go on an explanation path with them. Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably pretty typical for any onboarding from at any point along the way, right? It's just the typical growing pains of
yeah,
making that engagement.
I mean, a lot of it kind of starts at the back end and works its way forward. So studio needs to have their catalog in order. You can't create Avails if your catalog isn't in order. So you need those edit level identifiers, whether it's IDER or something that you use internally. And from that foundation, you know, the Avails can be a bit of a can of worms, but it's a good can of worms. Creating accurate Avails forces you to clean up a lot of other things in your systems, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What I found is a lot of time when people have difficulty formulating Avail, it means they don't completely understand what it is that they're offering. So if you don't understand it, you can't articulate it, and that applies to Avails as well. So we have about 3 minutes left. So to the audience, if you have any questions, it's now or never. But a couple more questions. Of course, we could go on all day like this, but
yes.
Greg,
yes,
I have an opportunity to use this time for something kind of interesting. If all of our attendees want to respond to a quick poll I just cooked up about Avails, that might be kind of fun. We can all share a little bit of information. Would that be okay with you?
Go for it. Yeah, certainly.
I'm going to give you all about 20 seconds or so to answer these 3 questions about Avails. Hopefully our panelists can see them as well.
Well, it just magically popped up. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'm the all-powerful host.
It says I can't vote though.
Yeah. I guess I could give you a chance to vote.
That's
I'm going to give
right.
folks a little more time to vote. We like to see some more answers. They're just starting to fill in now.
Okay, shall I ask my last question while people answer?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Great. Okay, so I was just going to say, just ask the question. You know, we have a vision of automation, and you know, through Avails, and my question is, can it be achieved? Can we get there?
Yeah, I think we can. I would maybe separate this into 2 questions: can it and will it? Right. I don't think there's any question we have the technology to make Avails boring, as you say, and make the entire media supply chain boring. We can look to the music industry as an example, right? You might say, well, the media supply chain is a lot more complicated, but it doesn't have to be that much more complicated. The music industry over the last 10 years got to the point where they standardized a bunch of things. It took a lot of work, but now standard, you know, streaming file delivery to platforms of albums is pennies per transaction, if that. And it's relatively easy and mindless to set up new endpoints and providers. And we can get there with our basic, you know, video deliveries, I think. The question is, will we get there? And I think the other tale of the music industry is, well, there were probably market forces that drove them to that put them to the brink of a point where they needed to collaborate and cut costs on the supply chain. So the way I see it, we need 2 things. We need a problem, but we also need some degree of desperation, right? And desperation will motivate the industry to work towards efficiencies and cost cutting collaboratively in a more aggressive way. I think we've already done a lot, and we've come a long way, but there's definitely a long way to go. There are market forces that are pushing us in that direction, whether it's compressed cycles in terms of the life cycle, reduced windows like early windowing for digital, simultaneous broadcast and digital release for television. Those kinds of things will force us to use Avails and to move faster. And if we don't want to pay more money, then faster is going to require us to standardize. But right now, there's just so much money being spent on creating content. It doesn't seem like we've gotten to the point where folks are desperate enough to look at the supply chain across the industry with the level of fervor that we'll need to get there quickly.
Yeah.
But I think, you could see lots of market forces pushing us there over the next five years or so, but it's definitely doable, in my opinion.
Okay. Armand, any final words?
I think Jacob kind of nailed it on the head right there. I mean, like the idea being that, getting to a level of standardization and an approach. I think maybe one of the things to bring up is control. And the more automation that we give to a system, the less control we may have, or more dependency on our development teams on a regular basis. I think it's balancing those two elements is kind of really important for us. And it's something that we do also, but, industry perspective, it's driving. We need that type of support with the volume and numbers that we're hitting on a regular basis. Yeah, I think the industry is going to go that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is Disney Plus. They got a very difficult tasking, and they decided to go full automation. And they've talked about how that has, they wouldn't have been able to launch without it. So
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Where there's a will, there's a way. Eric,
Yes.
do you want to give thank you guys. Great
Thank you,
panel.
Craig.
Eric, do you want to
Thanks,
give
thank you.
our results of the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, y'all. Great panel. Really interesting stuff. I could talk about Avails probably all day long. I think I probably have before. Here's the results to our statistically valid poll, Craig. So first of all, most of our respondents, and we didn't get everyone in our audience responding, but most of our respondents said that they are using EMA Avails to convey rights. It's terrific. We also found out something interesting here. I asked, and this is a multiple choice question, number 2, how folks are communicating and receiving communications about content rights today. So you can see that this adds up to more than 100%. So folks are receiving and are using a number of different means to communicate Avails, indicating that there isn't a standard even within organizations that are using a standard. So custom spreadsheets is by far the primary source, but we're also seeing a fair amount of text in emails to communicate rights. Word and Google Docs, also very high on the list. We see some PDFs, even a couple of cocktail napkins, matchbook covers, and smoke signals. So we're all familiar with those processes. Thanks everybody for, one more question. Yeah, how would you characterize your Avails process today? Seamless and super efficient was the second most chosen item. Most folks felt like it was okay, but would really like to improve it. So opportunity for all of us to work together to try to make that happen. And there wasn't anybody who felt that that answered the poll felt that their Avails process was a train wreck. Maybe those are the folks that didn't answer our poll that kind of felt that way. This was an anonymous poll. All right, thanks so much everybody for participating in our little poll there. And thank you to our panelists and moderator for this great conversation about the Avails to get us kicked off here today.